See, if you had high-speed internet, we'd have been able to start this meeting. Meeting is called to order. Roll call. We have roll call. All present? Anyone missing? Okay. We have roll call? We have it? All right. Moving on. Not him, but Public Safety Facility, the study process. He wanted to be present for that, so we would move that up. Didn't mean that was you were doing it. We'll move that up to number 7. With that, I would request approval of the agenda. Supervisor Wagner, Supervisor Augustine, second. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Approved. Minutes from the June 1st meeting. You should have received them or have them before you. I have a motion to approve. Supervisor Wagner, second by Supervisor Haskey. Any discussion, any questions, corrections? Yes?
The only thing was at the end, proposed next meetings are at 8 a.m.
8 a.m. We're not having that must be
8 a.m.
that must be reverting to a previous when they had them at another time.
We'll fix that, Mr.
Okay, we've got that taken care of. Thank you, Supervisor Yonke.
Shows I read them.
Oh, sorry, John Masteler is excused from this meeting. Glad you caught that. Okay, any other corrections on the minutes? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Same sign. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Public comment. Do we have any? No. Okay. We move on to administrator's report, personnel report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have the personnel report in front of you. As you're seeing, the vast majority of these folks are temporary summer help. We do have a couple radio operator jailers, one that has started and one that will be starting very soon. And our part-time WIC aide is going to full-time. There is more than enough money in the public health budget to do so. You see the recruitments. Just as a comment on the personnel report, I will be trying to bring before the committee either next month or month before or the month after a possible request to remove or eliminate the hiring freeze. Part of the reason why is kind of demonstrated right here on this personnel report, because under the current freeze, all positions would have to be approved by the executive committee before they could be hired. That makes it very difficult for part-time and summer help and the like. So that will probably go on I will be asking that be put on the agenda for either next month or the month after for discussion. Is there any questions regarding the personnel report? If not, I would like to go on. If you remember at the last committee meeting, you had approved the military leave policy, though there hadn't been specific, we had put it in concept as to what we would cover and what we would not cover. That is now there for you to see in actual language. If there is, and take a look at it, if there is for some reason an issue, or if the committee feels that that administration did not cover the intent of the committee, then we can bring that up at next month's meeting. But I do believe that this does cover everything that was the intent of the committee. And with that, I have nothing else from a personnel report or administrator's report, Mr. Chair.
Any questions for the administrator? Okay. We were going to move on at this point. I was going to present a public safety facility. The sheriff has stepped out, however, but I guess I can go ahead with that. We'll hope he comes back in. After considering this, what I wanted to talk about was what my planned approach on this is. Obviously, you saw that I pulled the study committee at the last board meeting after reflecting on this quite a bit and talking to different people, some of you supervisors even. What I am thinking, what my plan is rather than appointing, I'm not going to reappoint the Citizens Advisory Committee at this point. I think we've gotten a great deal of input on this. What I would instead intend to do would be to have the administrator and the finance guys, Paul obviously, Paul Kunish, have them sift through all of this information that we have now collected and come up with possibilities that will stand a chance of being supported on referendum. And so that is what my planned approach is at this point. So wanted to put that out there, and if there are questions, comments, concerns, definitely. Yes, sir. Supervisor Wagner.
First of all, I would ask the question of what do you project as a date or an election period for that referendum?
Well, obviously, that's going to be determined by how, and this would be overseen by personnel, okay? So the information is going to be brought here. The administrator and the finance people are going to sift through this information, bring it here, and then this committee is going to ultimately decide when we think we have a plan to go to the full board for the referendum. So that would ultimately be determined by this committee.
I guess my thought on that is the previous committee is at a point now where we're looking at the next phase is to look at the schematic layout. That does not commit us to that project. But I think all of the study that's been done now in the first two phases, now that we've picked the package that we're looking at, I think it would be prudent to go to the next phase and do those schematics and that information, to get that information so we have a lot better idea of costs. And in the meantime, I think then after that is when you would want to go out with a series of public information meetings that would be held all around the county, here, Casco, Luxembourg, Algoma, maybe a couple places in between. I'm not sure.
To go to that next.
Inform the public of exactly where we are, and we would have a better idea of prices then after the schematic design. Because if the public is not very, very, very well informed and understands the entire project, I don't believe a referendum has any chance of passing. That's my own thoughts.
Sure. To go to the next phase, however, is going to cost, what was the figure?
If we go with what the option 7 is right now at roughly the $35 million per contract, phase 3 is 7% of what would be considered the building cost. So while that is not perfect, you are talking probably close to $250,000.
So we would be spending $250,000.
I don't think that's correct. I think there's still a study phase in there that would be on the order of 70,000 before you get to the.
We have finished phase 1 and we have finished phase 2. Phase 3 is a percentage. It is 7% of what is considered to be the projected construction cost.
That's a significant expenditure of taxpayer dollars without being pretty confident of what we want to go forward with. Supervisor Yonke, did you have a comment?
I was just thinking, why is it 35 million? Is that including everything?
That's everything. That's the 35 million is a bit deceptive at this point. I mean, that's 35 million implies that we are going to go to referendum with the project as presented, the total project. I mean, that's not the case. That's not what's determined at all. So it would be, it's up to the Board of Supervisors is ultimately going to have to decide what they think should be brought to referendum. 35 million, that's including, Sheriff knows better than me, I guess, on that, but that's including jail, and I don't remember the exact, is that 52-bed jail?
Correct.
And then the sheriff's office
The garage.
and a garage. So those are questions that need to be determined before you would go to referendum. And that would be the purpose of having this reviewed. Supervisor Rombin?
Maybe Scott can answer this, or I don't know the answer, but what is the county getting for 7% of a number?
From the contract of Phase 3, what you will get is you will get the schematic design. They also, I become the de facto project managers of the construction.
So then, even after Phase 3, if it's a go, we're still going to be in to whoever is going to do the plans and specs and construction supervision and all that stuff. Is that included in the 35 million, or is that another fee we're going to pay?
My understanding from what the contract is that Phase 3 is for all the schematics and construction drawings and everything else, whether it's HVAC, elevations, in other words, all of the plans necessary to construct the facility, and therefore there should be no fee after that.
Yes, Supervisor Wagner.
Thank you.
Well, my understanding of this would be that, I mean, once we have the schematic designs and we have those packages, we'll have a lot better idea of what those exact costs are going to be based on, like, the construction that's going on in Brown County right now. And those are the latest and greatest. I mean, you can't get any better information than that. But at the same time, that is a package that also then is put together that could go out for bidding.
Correct. All I had said at the start was that under the current contract is that the architects would be paid 7% of whatever becomes the construction cost for the facility. What we know right now, and that I was only giving an estimate or an approximation, is that the current approximate cost for the option 7 is roughly $35 million. Again, I'm doing 7% of that. That doesn't come out exactly to $250,000. Comes out to, I think, closer to 235 or something to that respect. But if the costs were to come in lower, then that 7% would be lower. If that cost would become higher, that 7% would be higher. But yes, Supervisor Wagner, you are correct that once we have the schematics and the like, we can try to, if we wanted to bid out for a different project manager, we could do that.
Supervisor Kroll?
So are they putting out the designs on, or how do I want to say this? Are they bidding out on the design that we had, or are they making a new design, or?
I guess the best way to explain it is this way. The difference between, and this is going to be really bad, but just from a general idea, think of Phase 2 as more of the shell and some walls, but it's not telling you the carpeting, the flooring, all of those types of things. So once we get to the schematic, then you're really getting into what type of air handling system, what type of water system, those types of things. So you really get down to the screws, the nuts, the bolts, the inner guts of a building, where Phase 2 gives you more of what the shell is and some walls, but it doesn't get into the detail as to all the finishes.
So you're saying the shell as in we're going with 52 beds or more?
No, that
Matt,
hasn't.
or
All we're saying,
I mean, like,
right, all we're
gotta
saying for
put
the
a-
option right now, sorry, Supervisor Kroll, I apologize.
no,
Go ahead.
fine. Well, I'm just saying you're spending $250,000. So where is this draft going to originate? Is it going to be the 52 beds, or is it going to be more than that? Is it going to be the jail, the sheriff's office? Is it going to be the?
And I think I understand where you're going, and if I'm going down the wrong road, please correct me. Yep. I think what you're trying to ask is, are we wed to the 52 bed into option 7?
Right.
you are not wed to option 7. Currently, that is the option before you, but you are not required to do option 7 as a committee or as a board. What is being done right now, and I believe, and I don't want to speak for the chairman either, is I think that what he is trying to do with having some of this go through the executive committee right now is to get a better understanding from this committee what it feels comfortable with from a project standpoint. Are they wanting to have both the housing pod, the support, and the sheriff's office included? Are they and if so, then from option 7, then we're talking roughly $35 million, again, give and take on what the designs are. If the committee were to decide something different, well, then a different price tag would be attached to that, which would then create a different price tag for phase 3 because the 7% would be attached to a different price tag. I hope that was that the road you were going down, Supervisor Kroll?
Yep, that's what I was wondering.
And Chairman Widener, was that? I'm not Widener, sorry, Olson.
Supervisor Poppy, you have something?
I think Kim's question was, the building is being designed for a possibility of 80 beds, correct?
82 max, right? So
82
52, yeah.
max, the size. Inside of the structure will be set up for 52 at this time.
Right. And
So
my
it's
question,
going to be built bigger
right.
for future use.
But at the same time, I was wondering, you kind of answered it, Scott, because I'm like, we go and put all this money and then we're like, we come together and talk and realize, wait a second, we can't do this, or this isn't going to be feasible to present to the people. Do we have to pay more money to come up with another plan? That was my thing. So then are we spending more money to backtrack, or do we discuss as a plan what we want to do and then implement?
This is what I'm kind of getting at, is that it would certainly seem to me that it would be in the best interest of the taxpayers that we have a little bit clearer idea what we're doing before we would spend $270,000. Yes, Sheriff, please.
I'll pipe in here. I guess from the context of the conversation, kind of where we left off, where we currently are, I think that this board did an amazing job in adding credibility to this initiative versus what may have been done historically by convening that public safety study committee. It brought in not only members from the board, but it brought in those community members. And so I kind of want, I guess, we kind of left in the last meeting. I've got an email here dated, it was around March 27th, where there were still some requests coming in and some more exploratory work we wanted to do with that committee. And so again, on March 27th, shortly before that, a question was brought forth by some of those citizen group or members saying, well, okay, we've got this $32 to $35 million facility, and we talked about recommending option 7, which is what was done. But even within option 7, there's options within option 7. And I do think that there's work to be done within that group to identify how we can parcel that out, what that might look like. Everything from the total package, which we're already aware of, that was what's pretty much presented, to, okay, knowing where we are financially, knowing where we are as a community, what might that look like if we phase that in? Let's look at really looking down the road as a comprehensive vision that in 2020, we do not have the resources to move forward with a $35 million project, but we know we have to move forward. So let's look at this in a palatable, edible, vision of, okay, if we do this in 2022, 23, whatever, and do what is the dire need? The dire need is the jail, right? It's the jail, the communication center, that portion of it. The fleet garage, the sheriff's department administrative offices, it's not best, but we can get by. And so maybe I think there's room for a continued conversation, again, because we kind of left it hanging. This group of people came together for all these meetings, and the final question was, let's look at option 7 and let's tear that apart a little bit. Let's break that down to options within the option, and let's chew on that for a while. So I guess, what I would ask for is let's go ahead and continue to convene that committee, because again, I think it adds credibility to this entire initiative that we've got members of the public on it that shows, hey, we're trying to be as inclusive as we can, and we're not done picking away at this monster. That we put this out in this plan at the last county board meeting, but even within that optimal option of 7, there's options within 7, and let's explore that a little further. So when we do come forth to the board, we can say, well, here's what we think as far as components of option 7. And I just want to see a commitment. I think we could do this where we take care of the here and now, the needs right now, and then put it on a trajectory that in 5 years, 10 years, we know we're going to do this. And in 5 years, 10 years, because we got to be thinkers moving forward. We got to look at this from a 30, 40, 50-year perspective. And it has to include not just the jail, but let's do that in components and say, well, maybe in 10 years or in 5 years, we'll bring the sheriff's department over. And maybe in a few more years, maybe we can bring fleet over. And then in a couple more years, guess what? It's going to be time for the courthouse. But we've set the table for those future generations. We've set the table so that it's an obvious choice for them to say, oh, wow, these guys did their homework. Now all we have to do is put the ducks in a row. Rather than try to shove this whole thing forward in our current state and risk going nowhere. So I think that could still be some work of that committee. And then, as you stated, bring it forth then to the executive committee with a final recommendation, not just the recommendation of option 7, but maybe recommendations within option 7 that gives this board some options of how they can make this more palatable to this community. So that's just what I want to throw out there.
Others? Supervisor Yonke.
I guess my question, Scott, is phase 3. They would make schematics of all the buildings proposed, and we would decide whether or not we were going to build that much. They would only bill us 7% of what we actually choose to build, right? Is that what you're meaning?
Oh,
Or do we have to pay the 270?
no. I'm going to parse slightly what you said, if I may, Supervisor Yonke. I believe how that would move forward, though I believe Venture Architects would be willing to do whichever, is I'm going to make the assumption that we have indicated to Venture Architects what the building is going to look like. Does it include the sheriff's offices and the fleet garage and those types of things? Does it not? Is it the housing pod of option A? Is the jail support including certain things? And then from there, what would happen is Venture Architects would then create that schematic, because we've then done a much better job of saying to Venture Architects, no, this is what we want. And then from there, what would happen is you would have a cost estimate as to what the construction would cost, and the 7% would go on to that. So I very much doubt that he would be doing schematic drawings for 2 different types of jails, or 2 jails and an outbuilding. Now, could he do that? Sure. Would we be charged for it? Yes. I'm thinking what he's assuming and what I would be expecting is for Venture Architects to provide schematic drawings of the building that we're going to construct and nothing more. I hope that answers the question.
Supervisor Wagner.
I want to throw something in here. The only part of this package that we currently have, which is option 7, the only part of that package that you could really decide that you do or not do would be to move the sheriff's offices, because the jail is the jail. The number of 52 to 85 or whatever has nothing to do with the building. Okay? Hope everybody understands that. It's nothing to do with the building, because all we're doing is putting in bunk beds. They'll go from 52
Right.
to 85.
Right, the 52 to 85 is
Whatever the numbers
insignificant.
are,
You're
okay?
building a 52-person jail
Yep.
that can be expanded to 85.
Right. But when I say expanded, the expansion is nothing
Right.
more than bunk beds.
Right.
There's no more walls that are put up. Okay? Everybody needs to understand that. So that you really have that building. Okay? Now, you can't drive up to a jail cell and transfer a person, a newly arrested person, from the back seat of a squad into a holding cell. You got to have a garage. You got to have a sally port. Okay? If you're going to build it right away to the size that it needs for the facility you're building. Doesn't make much sense to build it smaller. Okay? All of the tours we took, and I've listened to this for over 20 years now, every tour we take. Well, the county board scrimped here, and they couldn't eat the big package. They couldn't grab the big gorilla, so they cut this finger off, they cut that little toe off over here, and now we got to suffer with it in our operation. Okay? And we've heard this in every single jail tour we went,
So,
even in Door County.
so you're recommending we go forward with the $35 million package to referendum?
I'm recommending that we go forward with the schematic package in order to get a better idea of what that package will actually cost us.
Well, this is the
Okay.
part that,
And we also need months, months to do the
this is,
advertising we have to do around the county in order to talk the public into believing it,
right,
okay? Because if you're gonna throw a $35 million package out there this November, I guarantee you
Well,
it's not gonna pass.
we're not
Guaranteed.
talking,
Don't even
there's
go
no-
through the,
there's no timetable set on that, but my, what I'm hearing now, and I guess this is, maybe I didn't hear this before, or maybe I didn't catch it, but I'm hearing that the 35 million doesn't necessarily mean 35 million. We need to spend the $270,000 to find out if the 35 million will really be 35 million, is that correct? Or did I miss something?
My understanding how the contract goes, and Sheriff, correct me if I'm wrong, what happens is that the 7% will be to be able to provide schematic drawings, which means construction drawings and the like, to build the facility. So if you if you do schematic drawings and the schematic drawings and you construct the building and it costs 35 million, then you're paying 7% of the 35 million. If you do schematic drawings and it costs 30 million, then you will be doing 7% of 30 million.
Okay, so maybe Sheriff, maybe this is a question for the sheriff. The 35 million then, I mean, if we spend the $270,000, is the 35 million, this is just kind of a random rough figure that could be off by a substantial amount, it could be substantially different.
Oh, absolutely. When you look within, and I think they broke
could
that
be
out. If
40
you look
million.
at the, well, no, I think they've capped it. I mean, but when you look at the numbers that they've included in that 35, I mean, they've loaded on your contingency fees. They've looked at your site prep. They've really, we want to say leveraged it, edged their liability, whatever you want to say, to say we want to make sure it doesn't go any further. And in some projects, as Mr. Wagner said, when we went out, there's a lot of ways, to kind of cut this pie, where some have said when they put it out, it will be no more than this, and said this is the absolute, this is the max we're going with any of it. So there's a lot of ways, but I think that the 7% is based on what our final decision is. So I think going into phase 3, they're not expecting that 7% up front. They're saying we're committing to that phase 3, and when it's all said and done, the 7% is what we decide that final design is going to be and what the total cost of that final design. So there's a lot of work that can still be done in phase 3 in regards to refining it. And as Mr. Wagner said, we've visited some designs where there was definitely some need to cut corners. And in my conversation, when I was talking earlier, I would, and I won't say the counties, but you had a county that's, okay, we want to do the jail, your dispatch center, the sheriff's department, the fleet garage. And instead of doing them right, they were more concerned about getting all those done within the confines of a given budget, that they did none of them justice. Versus what I'm saying is maybe this is a conversation about doing this in modulars, that when we do them all correctly. They may not all be done right away, but at least when we do them, they will be done effectively and appropriately. And that's my concern. I hate to try to fit the whole enchilada into a project,
Right.
and have to cut around the corners so bad that all of it is ineffective, and looking at saying what are the absolute needs, and let's do that so it's maximum efficiency and effectiveness, and then commit to a long-term project to say, okay, when it does come time to bring this next component in, we now have the resource to do that component appropriately. I would rather do that appropriately in phases than inappropriately altogether, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and I appreciate what you're saying, but and Supervisor Wagner, correct me, I don't want to misrepresent what you said, but what you said was that we can't do it that way, isn't, I mean, we have to have the garage, we have to have the Sally Port, we have to have it together. Is that correct? Or did I get that wrong?
I mean, you have to have a garage. Is it the
Right.
size of the one that is currently in the drawings that they were looking at? That one fits the facility, the size the
Okay.
way it is. Do you want to cut it down a little bit? Instead of housing some of the, like say, the SWAT vehicle or some of the other vehicles, I don't know if sheriff, whatever we would put in there. Instead of having some of those there, we keep them scattered around the county like we have them now. Okay, that's not as efficient as what we'd like, but it makes the jail package a little bit less expensive. You do have to, because of the fact if you're building a new site,
Mhm.
you're tearing down this one and dispatch is in this one. So dispatch has got to go somewhere,
I understand.
okay? And so dispatch, if dispatch goes into an existing building, which could be at the Emergency Management Center in Luxembourg, that, because they're a separate entity from the jail now in a new facility, that could work. But, so we look at different options as far as how we want to spend dollars there to make room for them in Luxembourg, in the same building.
Right. The other question, you know, for this committee, maybe some of you supervisors can kind of weigh in, is it sounds like, I mean, I realize that the presentation that was made was that, you know, option 7 is what they're recommending, but that hasn't been decided. Is that what the supervisors wish to do? I mean, that hasn't been determined. And so, I mean, I know that's the recommendation they made, but that hasn't been, that wasn't determined by the supervisors that, yes, that's the way we should go. So I worry too that maybe we're getting a little bit ahead on some of this. I think the supervisors have to provide clarity. I think the board has to provide clarity,
Yeah,
the full
well, I
board.
mean, that's what the presentation was to do, was to
Right.
basically bring all of the rest of the supervisors on the board that were not present on the previous committee, that had all of those meetings and got all of that information, so that that they could get up to speed to
Right.
option 7,
Right.
which is where there's only 3 supervisors. Mr. Poppy, Mr. Robnum, and myself were on that committee.
Right.
Jeff was there as well as Scott. Everybody else in the room wasn't, but I mean, everybody else on the board wasn't there. They have no knowledge whatsoever of what took place, other than reading minutes and things of that sort. And I'm not sure they don't glean the same thing.
Well,
Okay?
I think they read the reports, and I certainly read all of the information on it, and, but the conclusions I come to may be different from what others might be who read those reports, and, so we have to, I think, reach agreement on that.
So are we going to,
I think the board needs to reach agreement that, no,
the board needs to start over with
No.
thinking about option 7, but we have to retrain or train everybody on the board to get them up to the point of where they agree option 7 is the one we're going to pursue.
yeah, I think we have to get a board, to have consensus that this is the way we want to continue to move. And I don't think that requires a lot of time, does it?
I think it does.
Can I say one thing? So I'm a little lost because what Matt said is kind of my question, but then I got a little lost with Chuck. So with phase 7 is that what we went through last month would say, all right, we're going to go with this thing right here, this design. Now we go do it. We let them give it to us. They give us the price and we're like, this is way too much money. How are we going to present this to the people? How are we going to present this to the public? We just put all our time into this and we can't backpedal. But when I listened to Matt, you kind of answered my question where we can play with this design. We don't need to go with what that book said in front of us that day. We can play with it. We're saying, here's the architect, and as they're doing it, we want to take this out, add this in, downsize this, do this. So, but you are both saying something different here.
It's similar. I mean, because we've had the same conversation. So what Chuck is saying, I fully agree that what we do, we have to be careful not to build it to the point where it's inefficient. So we have to make sure that we're not cutting corners so bad that the whole thing ends up being just a wild joke. What I'm saying is that in the jail tours that we've done, we have to look at needs and wants. We have to look at needs and wants. And in our early conversations, and we were all part of this committee, I'll tell you right now, I was very headstrong. We needed to have the sheriff's department up at that building. We need to get out of that basement of the courthouse and up into this site. All right, now, fast forward as we look at this and look what our community's been through economically, I realize, again, needs and wants. All right, I can live in that basement. It's not going to take away from the efficiency or effectiveness of the jail proper. Is it going to be inconvenient? Sure, we're going to have Lieutenant Venerum drive over for our meetings, and we'll have to head over there. You know, but we have to look at this from a community standpoint. What I'm saying is, if we're committed to the jail, and as Mr. Wagner said, yeah, that includes the Sally Port. That includes jail support. We have to make sure that everything relative to the jail, let's do it right. But those things that aren't, we have an option here, a moment in time to say, you know what, let's go ahead and at least commit to a long-term vision that the community can coalesce around to say, hey, look, they're really doing their due diligence. Because I remember being here in 2000 or 95, whatever it was, and the county board then was just hell-bent. No, this is what we're building. You're going to swallow it. We can't afford that mentality. We have to be able to be sensitive and have our thumb on the pulse of this community to say, this is going to be a tough one. So let's make sure they realize we're doing everything in our power to scale this thing. I mean, while it still means effectiveness, because I don't want to create I'm the last one that wants to create an ineffective jail environment. All right. I mean, I'm in charge of it. It's under my statutory authority. It needs to be done right. However, we have an ability here and an opportunity to maybe separate out components of it. But all I'm asking is then if and when we do that, let's put that on a trajectory. Because I mean, and not necessarily this group, but historically, I've been sheriff for a while. We're notorious for doing a project and then walking away from it. So what I'd like to see is a commitment that we're saying we are going to be able to do this in the short term, and now looking at the vision in 5 years, 10 years, we're going to lay the table. We're setting the table for future generations. That's what I'm seeing. So let's not try to capture this all in our generation and muck it up for the next generation. Let's set the table, doing what we can and we should now, knowing that we're setting the table for them. And again, my big reason for being here tonight is I really still think there is some work of that subcommittee to provide additional clarity for the board. Because if we just take all this information now and bring it to the board, I think there's a lot of mud in that water. And I think that committee with those community members and some of the board members that are involved, let's start to find a little bit more clarity that when we do come back to the board, we've got a little bit better clarity. Because again, this thing ended real abruptly. We thought we were going to meet a few more times and COVID happened. So as of March 27th, there was still responses from requests of that committee. And again, I think if nothing else, just out of pure courtesy for the men and women that took time out of their lives to serve on this committee, I think we owe it to them to maybe see this through, put a period at the end of this thing, shake hands and say, thank you for your service. We've gotten to a point. If we abandon it now, I feel like we've just kind of left them in sort of a pause, like whatever happened to that committee I was serving on. So I guess that maybe taking some pressure off the board. Let's bring it back to that committee, give them a little bit more time to assist us in providing clarity. And that way, to Mr. Wagner's point, when we do bring it to the board, we've got a little bit better vision and clarity as well as options.
So
that's really my push.
So can the committee complete its work without, can they accomplish this without requesting that the board spend $270,000 of taxpayer money?
Yes. Because again, their last recommendation that came out of the committee was option 7. But the last part of that is what we talked about were options within option 7. So I think we've got a really good conversation that could be had about what could or could not be included in those options within option 7. Then we can come forward and say, okay, venture architects, we've done a little talking and we're doing a little creative thinking here. Now let's run some numbers that way. Tell us what this might look like if it's not just a matter of all or nothing. Because we might have to be put in a position where we might have to do this thing in phases. And so yeah, I do think there's some work without spending any money that we'd be able to slow pace this forward.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to echo some of what the sheriff is saying, is that as a committee, because I know there's concern about option 7 and the price tag, is the committee or whomever, whether it's the committee, whether it's the public safety study group, whether it's this committee or the like. Right now you have an option 7, but you can do what I will call sub-options of that option that do not require schematic designs. I mean, we have already previously, some of you had it, we had asked for what were the construction costs of the jail, of the housing pod proper, of jail support, and of the sheriff's office. So what could then happen is, what would happen if we were to not have the sheriff's office part of that as the project? Or what if something else were done within option 7, a modification? Well, that can be done. That does not require design, does not require design schematics. English is difficult on a Monday. So that would not cost anything. But I also want to caution one more thing. And I'm not saying that $200,000 isn't a lot of money, because it is. But the other part is that I don't want the $200,000 to scare this committee. And the reason why I say that is $200,000 is pennies compared to a $20 million, $25 million project. The one thing that we would want to make sure is that we get the design right, as opposed to thinking that we do it cheap and then we get to the construction phase. If you want to, and for those of you that know construction, the two ugliest words in any construction project is change order. So therefore, if it costs a little bit more in phase 3, but it reduces the amount of change orders, that is money absolutely well spent. So I don't want us to all focus specifically on the cost of phase 3. It is a lot of money, but I also don't want it to scare us from taking action when we get to that point.
It is a lot of taxpayer money, and I would be extremely hesitant to see that money spent if we weren't going to have some reasonable degree of hope of being able to put together a project that would be supported by the voters in a referendum. And that's my point, is if we're going to bring forward a $35 million, if we're going to spend $270,000 to bring forward a $35 million referendum, I think we better have a very long conversation before we do that. So, any other comments? Well, this has been extremely helpful and largely confusing. No, I do want to just make the comment that if we, and I appreciate Supervisor Wagner, about, getting all of the supervisors on board with the particular recommendation, but if we can't get all of the supervisors or a majority of the supervisors on board that this is the one to go with, I don't know how in the world we're going to have the hope of getting the public on board with a referendum. So I do think that we need to be very clear as we move forward, very careful that we are, as the sheriff pointed out, that we're bearing in mind what the public is going to support or might support. Otherwise, we're just going to be wasting a lot of people's time. So that's my concern, is I hear from a lot of people. It's interesting. Suddenly in this position, I hear from a lot of people on a lot of things. And, a lot of people, I think, do feel that there's definitely some concerns with the jail. But $35 million seems like a very big number to the taxpayers. And I think that we maybe would have done well to have kind of held back on bringing that number, just kind of putting that number out there. We could have maybe finessed that a little bit. But we are where we are, and we'll sort that out. Any other comments, questions? All right. Supervisor Romden, please. You're always the last one. You sit there thoughtfully.
I've made this comment before at the study committee, and it doesn't seem to get a lot of attention, but I'm going to make it again. I don't think, in my opinion anyway, that most people in the county really care if it's 20 million or 35 million or 100 million, whatever the number is. They don't really care about that number. What they care about is what it's going to cost them on their tax bill. And we're talking about two different adjustments to the tax bill. And these are going to be major adjustments. The first one is the cost of the construction. If we spend $30 million to build a building,
Correct.
that's going to be paid off I'm assuming over a 20-year period, what is that going to do to the average cost per thousand of assessed value?
Oh, $500.
And then once they're up and running, you're talking at least $1 million annually into the future for additional operating costs.
That is correct.
And that's something that's going to affect the levy limit. The construction cost, the borrowing, if we borrow it, the board could just go ahead and do it. And they don't,
We won't, we could, but we won't.
So those are the two important numbers, I think, that people are going to ask, okay, how much is it going to cost me? I don't care what the number of the cost of the facility is. I want to know what it's going to cost me.
And I think that's what
And I
people,
think those are the numbers that you have to get out in front and let people
I think
know.
that's why the 35 million, though, I think that there have been some,
Oh,
I
I
think
can
there have been
understand
some,
that.
there have been some helpful citizens groups, Supervisor Romdam, that have been breaking those numbers down for
People can do math, you know.
Yeah, Sheriff.
So again, around that same time, we actually had a lot of work that we were kind of leading up to with the committee that Mr. Robin speaks of, and then we kind of just went, right? We all kind of came to an abrupt end. And one of the other reports that we asked for, and it was actually Mr. Kunish, was exactly what you speak of. And so we look at property value in a $250,000 home. The building itself would equate to about $353 a year on that property. The operational cost to exceed that gives you stated that ongoing is about $153 on a $250,000 home. So your total is $506.59 thereabouts. For what that would impact on a $250,000 home. And the other thing so again, I agree, we need to be very cautious of how we bring that number forward and what that means, and make sure that our community realize we did everything in our power to refine that back while still solving the underlying need of this community. Because, if we can, we have to. If we have the ability, we have the obligation to try to refine that back. But going back to Mr. Wagner's points, he's absolutely right. I do not want to see us do something for the sake of trying to get everything into the project, and next thing you know, one of my staff has a toilet in the middle of their meeting room. That's what we saw in some of these places. We saw offices with sinks and refrigerators in
That
them.
could be very convenient.
We saw, there was some horrible short-sightedness. We saw designs where jailers were propping doors open because it was just it was cumbersome for them to lock doors. There were things that compromised the purpose and the security of those buildings after spending the money they spent. So we've got to be smart about this. Absolutely. So anything I can do to assist in information, but again, going back to my initial comment, I really do feel that there is merit to that committee to maybe stream this out. Doesn't cost us anything, and give those people a little bit more more opportunity to feel like they were involved, because those were also going to be our advocates. Those are going to be people that are going to help us spread this message of, wow, they really put their hearts and souls into this and did as much work as they could. So I don't think we want to squander what we've created in goodwill when it comes to that committee, and I think it might merit a couple more meetings. It doesn't cost us a darn thing.
$506 for those of us that are also paying for school referendum. And if you look at what taxes already are, that's and those of us that have children going off to college, and
And that's not even counting our local businesses when you think of the average business.
That's money that I could put towards tuition and things, and so it's real money, but all right. Well, we will move forward. Thank you so much for all of your time and passion on this, Sheriff. Certainly appreciate your hanging out, and my apologies to the town of Lincoln for keeping you late. Supervisor Yonke.
So in a nutshell, what are the next steps?
I'll report on that at the next board meeting. Moving on to something simpler, I think. Voting machines.
Yeah. Glad I don't have to deal with that. So in 2018, I was at my summer conference. We were told that they were no longer going to support our election equipment after January 1st, 2023. So we started as county clerks looking, many of us were using this equipment. I went to the towns and let them know, but we found a group discount if we all purchased the equipment through Command Central, who is our current vendor right now, and we're happy with them. The machines went from basically 8,400 a piece down to 6,600 a piece. So it was a significant savings, per unit. We need 15 machines. There's 14 municipalities. The county buys one as well. So today I'm here in front of you to ask to go ahead with the contract, given that this discount has to be approved between June and August. I have to sign the contract to be included in this discount. Furthermore, we will need to decide then, does the county want to pay for part of these machines, all of them, or none of it, and leave it with the towns? So the towns have been informed. I asked them to minimum budget $10,000, by 2021 purchase, which if I sign this contract now, we do not have to make payment till 2021. I have checked with Command Central on that. As far as the county is concerned, it was included in my capital improvement plan, figuring the worst case scenario that these towns can't do it. We have to have voting machines. So it is in my capital improvement plan for next year, more than what, we have to pay here.
So what are we obligated to pay?
Well, we would be obligated to buy one machine.
Okay.
So if you look into the packet, the cost and payment summary for approval.
Yes.
So the machines, this is showing the total amount dues. Those are for all 15 machines, but we'd have to purchase the machine at the 6,600, and that's the 8,440 minus the discount there that it's showing the 99,000. And then each unit is a $228 for firmware, $800 for testing and training, $150 for delivery. And the hardware maintenance agreement, the 405, that is something we already pay every year on equipment. That actually is going to be less because we would be going from 2 election machines per municipality down to 1. These new machines have available. So we don't have, before we bought 2 machines, the touchscreen machine, which is called the Edge, and the Insight machine, which is the ballot feeder. The Edge is the HAVA compliant machine. So we had to have 2 machines to be compliant because you have to have a ballot feeder, you have to have a HAVA compliant machine. This one is combining the 2. So we're programming 1 machine instead of 2 now. We would need more ballots printed, unfortunately. That would be part of the cost that I'm not a fan of. But the good news is on these machines that we're looking at, they are working on already an upgrade where we can add a touchscreen to the machines if we feel it's necessary down the road. And that would already be included in the firmware that we're purchasing with these. I guess what I'm looking for is just approval, first of all, to sign the contract to get it at this reduced cost. It isn't really an option of should we buy voting equipment. We are going to be without voting equipment after 2021. So it is something we have to do. Okay. The fact that we can get it at this discount is huge. And no other company is offering it. So I have looked at other places too.
And then what was the issue about whether or not the towns pay for them, some of this?
Right, so each town has their own voting machine. So each town would be required to have 1 machine. They would get a discount for trading in their old equipment. And then it's just a matter of who pays for the equipment. So, whether we have the towns purchase the machines or the county kicks in some or all of it.
We got to save for a jail.
It's all over the board, honestly, from county to county in the state, how they pay. There's no, one way to do it. But that would be up to the board to decide. So the last time we bought equipment was in 2012. We had a grant. So it was very different. We do not have a grant now. So the grant money was used to purchase the machines, and then the towns did purchase the touchscreen because they were required to upgrade with the HAVA equipment. So the county purchased with the grant, the one machine, the town's purchased the other machine.
So what if they did half?
Okay?
Yes.
Yes.
I think a little more background on this is this all came out of the 2000 election and the hanging Chad,
Oh, yeah,
okay?
I remember it
And
well.
then, how do we let and make sure everybody gets a chance to vote?
Mhm.
And so then we went on to a process of getting rid of the old equipment that we had, and not to mention the fact that the old equipment we had was so old, so outdated, we couldn't get parts, we couldn't make them run anymore. And so we had to go with new, but fortunately there were grants and things that we wound up doing that.
Mhm.
I guess I would like to see a breakdown or some options here of that. I mean, just saying, you know, do we make the towns pay part of it? I think I would like to see the towns pay something for these, as well as the county. You know, the head municipality of the voting is the responsibility of the county. But we get a lot of help from the municipalities that actually do that work. So I think there should be some paying here on all sides, or both sides.
Well, it looks like there's plenty of pain to go around.
Paying.
Oh,
Paying, not
paying.
paying.
I thought you said pain. I was going to say, it looks like there's plenty of pain.
I did mention to both Scott and Jeff, because I've been
Yes.
talking with them, but I do like the idea of the county having some teeth in it, and that when upgrades come up or when
Do you have a
we may need
particular,
more equipment, that I don't get it thrown back that we purchased these, and
do you have a particular recommendation?
I
that
do
you would
not.
make? You don't?
I,
Okay. Well, that
I mean,
was-
my recommendation is that, you know, we do put something towards it and not
Okay, I'm
nothing.
just trying to get things, anyone care to make a motion?
I just have another question.
Sure.
Are these a machine that you actually vote on now, or is it the tabulating machine we're talking about?
This is a ballot tabulator, so it is not the touchscreen version. I mean, you will fill out a ballot, you will feed it into the machine. It also will take care of if a handicap voter comes in. It's like a remote control. They have headphones and they can vote. There's a screen where they can see the names. So it does cover everything we need to have for elections, as far as they're concerned. Unfortunately, we would go backwards and not have touchscreens anymore, but that is something that we'll be able to update
Okay.
at some point if we decide we need to.
Okay, Supervisor Poppy?
I'd like to make a motion that we would split the cost,
I'll second it.
50/50.
I'll second it.
We have a motion by Supervisor Poppy, second by Supervisor Kroll. Further discussion?
One question,
Supervisor Augustine?
the ongoing annual cost, is that picked up by the townships or the county moving forward?
Correct. In my opinion, we wouldn't have to cover any of that 6,075 other than our own 405 of that, because we do pay for our own hardware maintenance agreement yearly. But that is something they have already budgeted for years. So I don't feel that that needs to be part of that 50/50. I don't know if anybody from the towns wants to say something. Gary, I know you kind of know what it's like for the town, so.
No, I don't have a problem with that. I think just the initial cost of the machine.
Okay, any other discussion?
So on this,
Yes.
you're talking splitting it 50/50, are you talking about the cost of the
The
machine?
machine, cost of the machine, correct,
Maintenance, the hardware,
Supervisor?
the updates, that's all gonna be the town's responsibility.
Right,
Cities
is
and
that-
villages.
Is that correct, Supervisor Poppy? Yes, that is correct.
So just the 99,000 is what you're saying, half of that?
Just the cost of the machines, they're on their own for maintenance.
So that would be 4220 per machine.
Yes,
I guess my question for the towns and municipalities is, are you gonna pay half if we send you a bill for half?
well, if they don't, we'll take our half of the machine back.
Scott, it actually would be
I guess my
3,300.
point is we're relying on goodwill.
getting the
to say
discount,
you're gonna pay for this
6,600.
machine, as opposed to any
yeah,
form
sorry.
of agreement that I've seen.
Question?
I guess what would be the difference if you send us an $8,000 bill?
Supervisor Yonke, you have a method on how we're going to collect this from them?
No,
Oh,
the motion is to pay half of the machine, but then you have the acceptance, testing, installation, training, delivery. That's all a big dollar amount too. That's $950 each.
I guess
Right.
what I was
So is that
trying to,
included in that price of the machine.
Plus the ongoing costs.
what I was trying to point out is there's no agreement with the county and all the municipalities. So whatever this body decides today is fine and fantastic, and we can go and feel good about ourselves, but there's nothing to enforce this with the municipalities.
How would we
I
go about enforcing that, Mr. Wisnicki?
Well, I presume the locals are in goodwill will negotiate how to work this out, but there's nothing concrete that can see that would make them do anything in particular.
Other than they do not want to hand count ballots. There is not one town, city, or village
So-
that would be willing to do that.
The
So,
enforcement incentive would be that we don't give them the machine and they have to hand count ballots?
yeah.
Would that be legal?
That is perfect. I mean,
Well,
at the
they
end-
have to have
That
a
sounds good to
compliant.
me.
Yeah,
They
and one-
have to be able to allow handicap to vote.
Supervisor Romden.
If we can we make this motion subject to an agreement drafted by Mr. Wisnicki between each individual town, village, and city?
Mr.
That would
Wisnicki, is
sign
that
the same
possible?
agreement?
I would be happy to do that work.
Happy. Wow. Well, that's really good. Okay. Happy about getting more work. Any other discussion, questions? We're comfortable
So-
with those numbers, Mr. Yonke, or did we need,
I guess, does it include all the setup?
that's, Mr. Poppy, does your, I guess we need clarification, Mr. Poppy, on what exactly your 50% includes, to make sure that we have that clear before we pass this, or don't pass it.
I guess from the start, I was talking about buying the initial machine. I mean, we currently pay a maintenance fee in the town now. So,
Yeah, I'm not talking about the maintenance, or I mean, programming costs and stuff that we pay for every year.
Mr. Feld, can you
If I may,
clarify?
well, actually, I was going from this sheet right here, where you see the machine, and then you see the ongoing costs after year one, then you see initial fees paid to Command Central, and then ongoing, if Madam Clerk, if you could explain which ones the towns pay now and which ones they don't pay, so that way when Supervisor Yonke is asking, when we're talking about 50%, what is going to be our costs after the machine that the towns will have to take on?
Right, so the towns already pay for the programming for each election.
And is that and I guess go from this sheet to make
Sure.
it easy for them, sorry.
So first of all, they pay annual fees for hardware maintenance agreement. That's already done. The rest, the summary of all initial fees, the one above that, that's just a one-time thing. The summary of all initial fees on the top with the 98,000, that is a one-time. The annual cost after 1 year payable to Dominion, that is going to be annual.
So if I'm understanding correctly, Madam Clerk, is that after the towns were to pay the initial fee for the machines, which is the 99, which is the, what is it, $6,600, they would have to pay annually the $228 for the tabulator firmware. As for the $950 for the fees, that's a one-time that the towns would have to pay in addition to the $6,600 for the machine. And the $405 is what the towns would have to pay annually, but they do that already. So it would be the $6,600 plus the $950, and then an annual fee of $405, which the towns already pay, and an additional fee of $228 annually for the tabulator firmware. Would that be correct, Madam Clerk?
Correct, yep. There will also be programming, which is, obviously, that's not something I can tell you from right now how much it's going to cost each year. It just depends on the election and what is on the ballot.
Okay,
So we're back to 50% of the machine.
that's correct. Yes, Mr. Poppy? Yep,
yes.
okay. Discussion? You understand the motion, correct? All right,
And that's subject to an agreement being drafted by the corporate council?
yes, correct, yes.
Could I also have you add that I could go ahead with the contract then, because I do need.
Is that amenable to you, your motion, Mr. Poppy?
That is correct, you can.
And
Thank
is
you.
that okay with your second, Mr. Romden?
Yes.
Thank you. Anything else? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, that was a little more complicated than we thought, but that's okay. All right, let's move on to something a little simpler.
Just one more question.
Yes, sir.
If the Democrats are successful in requiring national ballots mailed for every election, are these machines going to be able to handle us?
If
We're gonna hope that doesn't happen,
if
but
every voter is sent a ballot,
these machines will process 3,000 ballots per election. Yes, it will handle it for us.
well, that's a relief. Okay. Bay Area, Wisconsin Bay Workforce Development, there were slight amendments to the agreement there. You received those, right? And do we have a motion on that? Supervisor Haskey, thank you.
Second?
And seconded by Supervisor Romden. Any questions on this? This is pretty straightforward. It's just a kind of standard housekeeping type stuff. Okay? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, now we move on to the highly patient man in the back, broadband, the proposed contracts, coverage, PSC grant application, and so much more from the gentleman from Bug Tussle.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Jason Weed. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and General Counsel with Bug Tussle. So I don't know how much everybody in this room knows. We've had discussions for the last year with members of staff and I think have appeared in front of different bodies. But what we're here to do is hopefully move forward with a public-private partnership between ourselves and Kewaunee County. We have done similar arrangements with about 12 other counties and municipalities over the course of the last couple of years. Very happy with the success we've had, and we believe that the communities are also very happy with the success we've had. For those who don't know much about our company, we're headquartered and located in Green Bay, Wisconsin, just down the road. We're locally owned. We've got 14 owners, most of whom grew up on farms in the area. A couple of whom were in the telecommunications industry. The company was started primarily by Steve Schneider, who grew up in Hilbert, Wisconsin. Was the manager and effectively ran Cellcom for about 15 years, and then got out to chase his dream. And his dream was to figure out a way to bring wireless technology to rural areas. He always felt like it was unfair that urban centers got all the attention. And he knew, 20, 30 years ago, like many people did, that if communities didn't find a way to get connected and stay connected, either through, hardwire fiber or wireless infrastructure, that those communities would be left behind as the digital age came upon us. I think one thing to us and probably to everybody in the country that has happened recently that has given us even greater focus and attention and urgency as far as what we're doing is this whole COVID situation and the shutdowns and everything else. You couldn't anticipate that sort of thing. One thing we always tell communities is, why it's important to have wireless infrastructure in communities is so that from an educational standpoint, from a medical standpoint, from a farming and industrial standpoint, it's important to be able to access the internet for those things. But with these shutdowns and the rural school districts, both private and public, trying to find ways to continue to educate kids when they are at home, especially in districts where there's really no good connectivity, Our phone has been ringing off the hook for the last several months with communities and school districts who want us to find a way to get them wired so that the next shutdown, and knock on wood, we don't have another one, but I don't know if anybody can count on anything the way things have gone. So we are planning for more of that in the future. We hope it doesn't happen. Regardless, we're very proud of what we think we can do for Kewaunee County. We think we can provide very strong coverage, cover areas that otherwise aren't covered adequately right now. We don't decide what's covered adequately. That's decided by the Public Service Commission, who does studies. So we looked at their map, and we spent a lot of time with our engineers trying to devise a cost-effective way to provide good coverage for the majority of the population of Kewaunee. Not focused on Algoma and Kewaunee and Luxembourg so much, but more focused in the rural areas. And we think we've come up with a good plan to do that. We are doing it's a combination of 11 sites that blanket the county. 6 will be brand new towers. 5 will be us siting our equipment on existing towers. 2 of those will be leasing space directly from Kewaunee County at negotiated rates. And the Kewaunee County staff and council told us that they wanted us to sign the same deal that has been offered to other people, and we accepted that. So we didn't ask for anything more. And so we're happy to move forward with that. The overall funding mechanism, for those of you who don't know, is the PSC provides grants on an annual basis to companies such as ours, communities such as yours. If the money isn't spent in Kewaunee County, it'll go someplace else in the state of Wisconsin. I can assure you of that. We've been very successful in seeking grants. Last year we applied for 6 grants and received 5 of them, and the 6th one we believe will come in 2021. We believe that this is a good opportunity to move forward with Kewaunee based upon the grant that was awarded last year. The project would be, we tried to keep this a little bit simpler. It's not as hard as building a jail. The project in total for all of the towers and siting is about $2.5 million. It's split up with $960,000 coming from the broadband expansion grant, Kewaunee County with $960,000, and $600,000 directly from Bug Tussle up front. Kewaunee County's obligations for that $960,000 will be covered 100% by Bug Tussle in operating the sites. So we make all the payments. I think at the end of the project, Kewaunee will receive all of the money back, plus the interest rate charged by the bank, plus an extra $30,000 margin. And Kewaunee County will also receive some revenue sharing on the towers that we're leasing from the county. So we believe that what's been structured with county staff is fair to the community, fair to the taxpayers. We believe that we've never had any problem with us being the guarantor and the payer on grant funds or conduit bonded funds. Every payment has been made in full and on time. And we're very excited to get to work in Kewaunee. We've got people who are looking for the sites already and knocking on doors. We're not being presumptuous. It's just important that we always stay in front of it. But it's our hope that the executive committee and that ultimately the board sees fit to approve the 3 agreements that are in front of it. The tower lease agreement, the promissory note, and the broadband expansion grant agreement. We're comfortable with the terms of all of those. We're excited to be here, and we think we'll be a great asset for Kewaunee County moving forward. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has. I will tell you off the bat, I am not a technician. I can do my best to answer technical questions. If I don't know an answer, I'll get right back to you on it. But any questions about our company or our future plans or the structure of this agreement or the agreements themselves, I'm certainly happy to answer.
So if we assuming that we get this approved in July at our board meeting there, these proposals, when would you anticipate that you would be operational, that you would be providing service to residents?
Most likely, because we're getting started in the last, I guess middle of the third quarter, we would have all of our site acquisition work done. All of these sites would be acquired. We think we would be fully zoned and permitted by the end of the year. The regulatory part takes a minimum of 120 days, and sometimes it can be longer because it's an FCC undertaking. Everything has to be reviewed. FAA has to take a crack at it. The SHPO and NEPA, which are environmental reviews and historic site reviews, can take a while. But if it goes that minimum amount of time, 120 days, we think we could be fully ready. NTP means notice to proceed to our construction team in the first quarter of next year, and we can have these towers built in the spring.
Built in the spring, and that means then residents would have access to high-speed internet when?
In the spring, the day we turn them up. So our goal would be to get these things up and going. I hesitate to give a specific date because a lot of factors are at play, but we want them up next school, this coming school year, the second semester. We would like these up and running mid-spring. And as we know more information, if we're lucky enough to have this proceed, we'll keep the staff informed, and we're going to try to move things along as quickly as we can.
Based on your map here, what do you anticipate, what percentage of the residents of the county do you anticipate would have access then, improved access?
Well, it's hard to give a specific percentage, but we think the map covers, I believe, something like 97% of the population of the county. That leaves out Algoma and Kewaunee because there's a lot of coverage there and a lot of hard wiring there. But for the parts that are unserved or underserved, we think we cover in excess of 95%, close to 97%. And the reason why that number is important to us is we do work for AT&T. AT&T would be on at least some of these towers with us, and they have a contract with the Department of Homeland Security. And they supply what's called FirstNet services, which is a dedicated communications line that can be used by police, fire, and emergency. And it was a way to nationalize communications in the event of emergencies of a national character. So that number is important to them. They're required to cover 99% of the continental United States with FirstNet by the end of 2022.
So the dead spot in AT&T's coverage cell phone coverage might be corrected as well?
Yes, I mean, our goal is to get absolute coverage for AT&T.
So with the reconfiguring that you did on these towers and so forth, you've obviously, from what was originally anticipated, you've been able to greatly improve the percent of the residents of the county that are going to have access. Yes,
and I want to be clear. What we can cover also depends on the receiving end. So, if somebody is, in a valley that we can't quite reach, we might not be able to get to them right away, but we have got other ways that we can get there if we run into that problem. But our goal is to be able to provide it to as many people as possible, especially those not getting it now, especially schools and things like that.
Okay. Questions, supervisors? Supervisor Romden, please.
You said there were going to be 3 agreements or contracts that the county board's going to have to approve. What were those again?
We've got the broadband expansion grant agreement. We've got a tower lease agreement because we're leasing space on 2 towers owned by the county. And then the third agreement is simply a promissory note for the $960,000.
Other questions?
Are we going to get hard copies of these contracts before the county board meeting so we can review them instead of reading them on the computer? Or Can I get a hard copy of each one?
Yes, you can get a hard copy of each one. Both the promissory, all three contracts were part of your, bless you, were part of your agenda packet.
I read
The,
some of them.
the tougher part that we're still waiting for, it has to do with the project budget and the project scope. And part of the reason why there is because we are still, surprisingly, waiting for documents from the Public Service Commission. What I put in front of you is an outline or a tentative kind of what the budget and what the scope would be. That information was taken from not only the RFP that was submitted by Bug Tussle, but also the application that was submitted by Bug Tussle. So when we talk about scope and budget, what we're going to do is we're going to mimic the PSC. The PSC is going to say that Bug Tussle, you're going to do these things. And if you don't do these things, then we will not provide money to Kewaunee County. And our agreement says that if PSC doesn't provide us the money, we will not provide the money to Bug Tussle. In that same respect, from the budget standpoint, Bug Tussle is therefore agreeing to provide this amount of equipment roughly at this cost, and therefore, again, that will all have to be documentation that would be submitted to the PSC. And if there is an issue that the PSC has, again, what it basically comes down to is if the PSC doesn't pay us, we do not pay Bug Tussle. So
Do we have an idea? I mean, on the PSC grant, do we have any way of knowing exactly what is the,
hold up.
yes?
I'm going to guess it was COVID. It's interesting only because this is a little strange. We've had a couple conversations with the PSC, and we have asked, and of course, it's kind of like the contract's in the mail. Is kind of the response.
I was just going to say that is true. I think that the COVID and the shutdown has slowed things down a little bit. But also every year, people have a chance to file appeals to the PSC grants. And every year appeals are filed usually by the competitors of whoever requested it. So we had that. Everybody else who applied for it had that. And I know it's taken them longer to get through that appeal process, but we were told that everything was cleared up, and one of our other community partners received a copy of their agreement last Friday. So I'd be surprised if Kewaunee didn't have something this week.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the schedule we're on, but okay. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Romden.
Is the agreement, is the contract between the county and the Public Service Commission, is that a separate contract that, in addition to what we're going to be doing with Bug Tussle?
Correct, it is. Because we are the ones that receive the grant funds, there is a contract between the PSC and Kewaunee County. But again, to protect ourselves, we have then a separate contract between the county and Bug Tussle, and that they need to adhere to any of the stipulations that the county would have to adhere to.
So you're saying the county has not received the contract from Public Service Commission yet?
Correct.
So will we have that before the board meeting, you think?
I hope. I can't speak for the PSC, but if we go from what Mr. Weeda said, then hopefully we get it this week and we should be okay.
I would certainly like to see what's in that agreement between what work the county is committing to the public service and then what we're committing to between the county and Bug Tussle.
They are going to be extremely similar.
When is our board
They
meeting?
might be similar, but I haven't seen that yet.
I understand, Supervisor Romden, it will be extremely similar.
The board meeting is the 21st. What would be, Mr. Romden, what would be the minimum amount of time we would need to have that, do you think, in order to be able to stay on target for the July meeting with this? I would think we would need that a week ahead.
At least if we could get it the week before.
I think a week before. If we don't have it a week before, well, there's no reason, this is the only reason to have the July meeting.
And Mr. Chair, in this respect, if for some reason we do not receive the documentation from the PSC in a timely manner, I don't believe that that would change anything from a bug tussle standpoint. We would just then approve those documents in August. So I think that our communication with bug tussle has been fairly clear as to what our intent is and what our expectations are, and therefore they have, even without a contract as of yet, they are diligently working on site acquisition and site location, as well as prepping for any equipment and or crews to construct and erect towers as needed. I don't want to speak for bug tussle, but that is my assumption.
That is true.
Supervisor Yonke.
Yeah, we've been approached in the town of Montpelier of the 2 sites that are on the map, and
Okay.
I put the word out that these guys are okay, you know, that for the people
Would you ask
think-
on that?
think about towers in their area, and they're not bogus people just coming and asking for a site. So
Well, Montpelier, you better get that moving quick.
yep,
I was approached today from a person, so.
Yep.
Oh,
a
Moving
guy
very-
named Chris has been asking about zoning and everything, so we
Okay.
forwarded all our zoning to him.
moving very quickly. Yes.
So Scott, you're saying that we could approve the agreements with Bug Tussle at the July meeting, even if we don't have the contract from Public Service Commission, then we could do PSC in August?
If the board is comfortable doing that, yes, we can. If the board is comfortable to delaying it so it's all kind of done in August, from the county standpoint, that's not an issue for us. And while, again, I don't want to speak for Bug Tussle, I would believe that that would not be an issue for them either.
Mr. Wisnicki, do you have any thoughts on that?
You could do that. I would suggest you not. I fully anticipate what the PSC contract is going to say, but that being said, I still want to see it. So I would think that we'd want to have all those documents together, and so you'd have adequate time to look at all of them. And if we don't have them timely enough, this is a big deal for the county. I think you're better served to wait till August. That way, there's plenty of time to vet all this out. That's just my recommendation.
So I'm going to say that if we don't have that PSC grant 1 week in advance of the July meeting, that we're going to cancel that July meeting. There would be no reason to have the July meeting. And I think that we need a week to review those. It would certainly be nice if we would get that. So if you can put any,
I'll talk to my enforcers and see if they can go down to Madison. So what we're basically saying is if we do not receive PSC documents by a week today, then we will delay we will delay approval until August. Is that a fair statement?
We will cancel the July meeting. This would be the reason for having the July meeting. So, and we certainly would need, I think a week would be fine on those documents to give everybody adequate time to review. But if we wouldn't get them, if we don't have them a week before, I would hate to see us rush a, project of this scope and magnitude. Other questions? Yes, Supervisor Romden.
I'm assuming this is going to be a recommendation of finance to the board, but the county's portion, the 960, of exactly where we're going to get the money.
Thank you, Mr. Romden. Actually, I was going to touch base on that, so you segued perfectly for me. Currently, right now, there's a couple different ways that we could finance the $960,000, which is the Kewaunee County's portion of the match. One way would be for us to issue some sort of debt and then have Bug Tussle pay that debt plus 50 basis points. The other way it could be done is for the Kewaunee County to just put out the 960 without any debt and charge again roughly 3%. From a financial standpoint, it will be my recommendation to the Finance Committee and to the board that the county does not take out debt for the 960. The Economic Development Fund has sufficient funds for the 960, which was part of the reason for the creation of the Economic Development Fund. In addition, through negotiation with Bug Tussle, they are agreeable to a percentage of 3% flat, which when they were doing their proposal, they were assuming debt of 2.5 plus 50 basis points, which would be 3. We have sufficient funds and strong enough fund balances that we can expend the 960, and therefore my philosophy has always been, why go into debt if you don't need to go into debt? Because then there's still other documents that have to be approved and other time factors and considerations. We have the 960, we prepared for this. Let us then use that 960 for this project as it was intended and receive 3% interest, which, if we know from interest rates for local government investment pool and the like, this is a good rate for the county.
Other questions? Yes, Supervisor Haskey.
Then when, as they make payments, will that money go back in the economic fund to loan out for another businesses later on?
That would be my assumption, yes. I mean, that's ultimately the decision of the Finance Committee, but what had always been my intent is that any money that was kind of put into the Economic Development Fund, that any money, any income generated from that fund would go back into that fund. But that is a decision of the Finance Committee and Board.
Other questions? Yes,
It's not a question, but it's just, I don't agree with using our own money when you could use somebody else's for nothing.
Use theirs for nothing.
If we issue debts for this, they're going to make the payments principal and interest.
Right,
it's not costing the county any money.
Yeah, but we're
plus
giving
the
up
fact-
the 3% interest that we could gain.
You're not giving up exactly 3%, but my point is that we have no idea what the economic situation of the county is going to be in the next couple of years, even though our fund balances are strong now. It's like if you were going to go out and buy a new car, would you take your $30,000 out of your savings account, or if the dealer says, or the company says, here, we'll give you, pay this off over a number of years, no interest? Why would you use your own money when you can use somebody else's?
Well, well, you go ahead. I was just going to say, this is something, you're on Finance Committee, so, they're the ones that are going to be.
I'll say it one other way, but, and I didn't want to, but when we look at it right now, interest rates for debt is between 2 and 2.5%. So let's just say that it's 2.25, the good middle section. If we add 50 basis points, that's 2.75. We've agreed to 3%. So actually, it's in our best interest to grab the 3% than the 50 basis points to the debt that we'd be getting.
So what's that going to? What's our profit then over say a 20-year period or whatever you do?
If you do 3% at
12 years,
again from a back of the envelope standpoint, 3% of roughly $1 million is $30,000.
Okay. Well, that's going to be a fascinating discussion for Finance Committee. Any other questions? One more question for a gentleman from Bug Tussle. We have appointed I have appointed the Broadband Committee, and I know that Chairman Bob was working on getting them together. There are, as I understand, moving off of this project, moving on to next steps, as I understand, there will be additional grants available, and substantial amounts possibly. What do you know about this? And
yes, there are the PSC will have additional grants. They'll be able to match what they did last year for 2021. There's also other grants, community block grants. There's a wireless specific grant that I think still has to pass this year. Hopefully they're trying to get that done before November. But there's several grants out there, and we are open, and we've already given a lot of thought to additional ways we could bolster and strengthen the network in Kewaunee County and surrounding counties. We also do fiber And
Excellent.
we're not usually a last mile provider, more of a core provider to get that redundancy in place. And we would love to continue discussions with the county, with that committee, and with anybody else, because we think that this is time right now for Wisconsin to take its share of any money available from the federal government and put it in place in our rural areas before it gets sent someplace else.
So there are a lot of next steps, and you guys are up on that, and we'll hopefully be able to work with that committee.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. All right. Anything else? Thank you very much, sir. Sorry to keep you waiting so long on the agenda, but it's a lengthy agenda tonight.
That's
Thank you
okay.
for
I'm
your
just glad I'm
patience.
not building a jail.
Oh, yeah. All right. Moving along, discussion upcoming IT purchases, routes to recovery.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is, to a large degree, kind of a heads up for the executive committee, since the executive committee oversees the information technology department. We are looking that, I forget exactly the date, but Governor Evers had put out a program from the federal's CARES money that was allocated to the state. He has created or established a program called Routes to Recovery, which provides money to eligible money to every local government in the state, whether it's city, county, village, or township. I believe the Kewaunee County's allocation is about 330, it's either 337 or 373. I'm transposing one of those. But what happens is there are 4 criteria for these routes to recovery money. 1, it has to be a government expenditure, which will be reimbursed. It has to be unbudgeted, which means that we cannot use these funds for something that has already been budgeted in our 2020 budget. It has to be COVID related, and these expenditures must take place between March 1st and October 30th. So I conducted a meeting with our public health officer, our IT director, our finance director, and our emergency management director. When you have $337,000 that may be available to the county, I want to make sure that we try to utilize as much of that as possible. And the biggest thing that we're trying to look at is it has to be COVID related. We know that strictly just from wages is only about $40,000, a little under $40,000. We can buy additional cleaning supplies, but it has to be beyond what we would have normally spent in 2020. So some of the other expenditures that we were looking at is to, I guess I would call it, with our conference rooms, allow for more video conferencing as well as equipment for remote working. So for some of those employees that were using their own personal computers or had to bring their office PCs home, instead, if something were to happen, we now could have laptops available for them to work at home remotely. What we would also like to do is, as I said before, take those conference rooms, put up video screens and cameras to allow for video conferencing in all of the conference rooms within the county buildings, including this county boardroom. We're looking at possibly having 2 video screens there. And part of the reason that we'd be looking for using this type of money for that is that the equipment, while COVID related, does also allow us to utilize it for other functions as well. So we've been looking at that, and we're starting to get some quotes and some bids right now. But as we get closer, we would then be bringing them to the committee for approval. I can give you, in fact, since Ross is right here, maybe he can give just a very broad overview as to what some of these projects are and kind of what the ballpark figures may be. Would that be okay, Ross?
Sure. So what we're looking at, we've identified 9 conference rooms in Kewaunee that we could put technology into the room to basically service any type of activity that happens in that room. There's a lot of meetings that happen throughout the buildings where we have people that travel from Luxembourg to here, the courthouse to here to those areas, the highway department, where we can do some video conferencing between them, where we don't have to have such a large number of people in one room. We can basically video conference those. Some of the technology that we would add to with cameras and TVs alike is more opportunities for people to give presentations either remotely or in the room itself. So again, the 9 rooms that we identified, the county boardroom, we've been looking at refreshing this room anyways. The technology here is about 10 years old at the present time, so it needs some refresh there. We're looking at the committee room where the majority of your committees take place, the large conference room down in Public Health and Human Services building, as well as the medium-sized room in Human Services building. They do a lot of meetings with patients and things that won't be coming in much because of COVID. Even in the future, they're looking at, because it's working well, that we may end up doing more of remote services with these people. That allows us also to, they seem to like that better. They don't have to leave their home. They can stay at home. They can hop on their laptop, whatever they need to do, and they don't have to come into the building. So some of those things work. We've identified the highway training room is another large conference room that we can outfit. We have the jury assembly room, which is basically 2 folds there. We can utilize the rooms for committees and for other meetings within that building, as well as when the jury meets, we've got technology then that can communicate up to the courtroom. So if you have a jury trial, you have a number of people that are downstairs that can get basically the same instructions from the judge being upstairs in the room. They can be downstairs, so you can utilize that more. We've identified 2 rooms out, in fact, 3 rooms out at the fairgrounds. The committee small committee room that most of you have probably visited at some point in time, the 4-H room, and then we're going to do a slightly, I'll call it dumbed down version of something in the large room, which we can use to, when we rent that building out, we'll put a screen in there, we'll put a projector in there that's permanent. So those who are renting the room for a wedding, conference, whatever they do, they have technology in the room that they can use. So that's basically one of the projects that we're looking at spending some of this money for.
What about the extension?
You mean?
The extension offices here.
We did not look at that conference room, but presently right now they have a video conferencing unit that's in that room. It's older. It probably needs to be refreshed, but we can certainly look at that room to add more.
Okay, thank you.
And we also, with some of these funds, we are looking at trying to purchase some more cleaning supplies beyond what has been budgeted. Those can be used in 2021 as well. We are looking at possibly some temporary staff to do some basically testing, or not testing, screening for when people come into the courthouse, especially during court trials. You have a large number of people coming in at one time, and that could overwhelm the current staff, preventing them from doing some of the things that they're doing. So we're looking at a variety of different things, and I believe, if I am correct, Ross, we're looking at to do a conference room to set it up the way we're looking at it, it's between $12,000 and $15,000 a room. So again, if we were to do about 9 rooms, we'd be talking roughly about $150,000. But again, our allocation is $337,000. So these are things that we can do now that can be a benefit and be reimbursed, that would therefore not cost the county additional funds.
Supervisor Augustine?
On the routes to recovery, is there a list, Scott, that tells you what we can and can't do from the state? Because I know firsthand with the payroll protection program, they keep making new rules every month. And are we going to spend a lot of money and come to find out that, okay, now this doesn't qualify, and how are we going to pay for it then?
Well, and that's a very good question, Supervisor Augustine. First of all, there are 3 different reimbursement periods. The first one was July 1st, and I think that's going for the next 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks later, which is September, and then finally November. What my feeling is when we start to do some of these things, or are about to do some of these things, we will then send a request to DOA saying, or I'm sorry, Department of Administration that's overseeing these funds, saying, we are looking at spending the money on this item. Here's how it's related. Here's how it's unbudgeted. Here's how it meets all the 4 criteria, and trying to get some type of approval prior to that before we expend the money. I understand your concern.
Supervisor Kroll?
I just wanted to know if it was just for in this, like for the county facilities, or can it be used in our county for other things like school?
Schools are getting their own money, and every city, town, and village is getting their own allocation as well. And what can happen also is if a local government feels they cannot expend their allocation, they are allowed to transfer money to another local government if they see fit. And I did have some conversations with the 2 city administrators, again, to talk about some of these things, because I know when this was first announced that there were some local officials saying, how am I, perfect example, there's a township, and I'd have to go back and check. So a perfect example, the town of Montpelier has an allocation of $21,590. So, and I don't want to speak for the chairman, but I know that in conversations with some folks, they're going, I don't have $21,590 worth of expenditures to go with. And what can happen is some of those expenditures could be done to help to outfit EMS, or to outfit fire, or to help with elections. There's a number of different things that could possibly be done. But even if there's a point where the town of Montpelier or any township or the county were to feel we can't expend what we have, we are allowed to therefore then transfer those unspent funds to another local government if we want to.
Okay. Any other questions? All right.
Stay tuned.
Yes, stay tuned. Okay, moving on. Discussion, grant writing, possible contracting of grant writer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This kind of segues because not just from the routes to recovery money, but what I would like to kind of do as a county is we have not been very aggressive in looking for and writing for grants. And I do not, and therefore, while I am the county administrator and I have written for grants, grant writing is not my primary job. And so therefore, I can write grants, but there are a number of times that there's someone that could do a better job than I can. So I look at a couple different grants. We have the Coastal Management Program. We have the Economic Development, the EDA from the feds. We have USDA. We have a number of different grant programs and grant funds out there that we could be trying to access. And in that respect, I would like to, only on a per project basis, see if it would be possible to contract with a grant writer to therefore write the grant for us. And the reason why, again, is they do this as a profession. They're going to be better at it. And I think of it in one way. If I were to pay, and I'm making up the number because it would all depend on the contract, if I was paying a grant writer $5,000 and they get me a $150,000 grant, I'll take that all day. And the reason why is because that $5,000 that we spent on a grant writer, we received $150,000. Now, the other thing that we can do, and a perfect example is through the Coastal Management Program, what we can also have these grant writers do is when we have them put together a grant for us, some of these grant applications can then be templates that then we don't have to ask them to write it again. We can ask our department heads, and I'll give an example. In the Parks department. Coastal management has grants that we could do some maintenance on the Anope Trail. So if we were currently we budget $7,500 every year for Anope Trail maintenance. So if we were to have a grant writer help us to write that grant, and now what happens is $7,500 now becomes $15,000, and then next year we don't have to have a grant writer. Instead, Mr. Myers, our Parks Director, can therefore modify that grant application because it's a different section of the trail. You're putting in 2021 numbers, and now again, you're going to get $15,000 a year instead of the $7,500, and you're not having to pay a grant writer again. We have that same thing that every single year, the Land and Water, though it's not county money, Land and Water does well testing. We could use well testing and go through the coastal management grant and do that. We have Lakeshore EDA grants, DNR grants, a number of different grants that we could be going after and be much more aggressive with. But again, I am not the one that has that type of that knowledge and expertise, and I'm trying to get basically some guidance from this committee is if this is something that would be of interest to allow administration to do.
Supervisor Ramden.
Having numerous years of experience in grant writing, the big thing with grants is you have to have a project. Just because there's a grant, you have to have a specific project to apply for a grant. In our situation, in all these coastal management, USDA, economic development, Bay Lakes Regional Planning Commission writes grants for numerous municipalities all the time, and I don't know if they even charge a fee at some of them. And if they do, I'm sure it would be a lot cheaper than a professional grant writer, because they're writing these grants all the time. So before we go into contracting with some professional grant writer, I think we need to talk to Bay Lakes and see what they can do for the county.
Supervisor Haskey.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on the Bay Lake Regional Planning then too, because I remember the years that I was on that committee, they would do printouts, like Sheboygan County would have page after page after page of all the different grants that they wrote for them, and Kewaunee County rarely was a page. You know, so I think some of the counties were really utilizing them very well, and we weren't.
And I don't disagree with that, Supervisor Haskey and Supervisor Ramden. I have had and continue to have those conversations with Bay Lakes Regional Planning. I also do know as well that a certain amount of their time is limited. So depending, they may or may not have time for some of those.
Supervisor Wagner.
Yeah, I've got a little experience with this area back. The RC&D program was very big in writing grants or going after grants, and they used to utilize the services of professional grant writers. The current guy that we've got right now that we're contracted with to actually kind of do our business side management of the Glacierland RC&D, Don Peterson, his office, he's done many grants. He's part of his main job. Most of those grants are in the areas forestry type related or invasive species type related, a lot of those things. But some of that is, a lot of times those grant writers receive a percentage of what you get in the grant. In other words, if you're going after a $100,000 grant, they get a percentage of that $100,000 as their fee. That's what their fee is. Some of them may work on a just straight so much.
There are different contracts, different ways. Some are flat fees, some are percentage, yes.
Is that legal? Is it legal to do the percentage?
You can do the percentage, you just can't have the award be used to pay for the fee. So what happens is, let's say that you're saying that it's a 10%, it's a 10% of whatever the grant is, and it's $100,000, then to the grant writer you have to pay them $10,000. And if you receive the award, again, none of that $100,000 then goes towards the grant, goes to the grant writer. Has to go towards whatever the project is.
Anything else? Okay. Moving on.
Just,
Yes, sure.
did we resolve this issue? I mean, are we
Down for discussion.
just gonna, that's pretty much it? Or are we gonna, does anybody want to allow the administrator to go out there and search for people to do that?
What's the project we're going to be looking for somebody to write?
If the committee likes, I can start to bring forward the projects.
I think that would probably be helpful as if
Be
we had a
helpful,
project.
and then first talk to Bay Lakes. Can you help us?
I agree.
I mean, I can't see spending it all, unnecessary money if we don't have to.
I can bring both the projects as well as Bay Lakes, any response as to helping to write the grants for us and if they would charge, what they would charge.
All right, Chairman's report. Just a couple of quick things. Scams. 'Tis the season, apparently. Linda, or one of the supervisors, contacted me, had said that she had, I believe it was a text, had received from me saying that I needed her help with gift cards. And apparently this, it looked to me like this was somehow using, based off of county information. And I believe I forwarded this to Ross, and I believe that's not the only instance of it. I don't know if you wanted to comment any further. I just basically, I guess, before you send money, check.
What we tell our employees as well, email, anything that you receive, it's better that you double check things. If you're being requested to do something that seems a little out of the ordinary, I mean, all it takes is a phone call to say, hey, did you mean to send this email? Did you mean to send this text? Because it seems everything seems to have been lifted at a much higher level during COVID, that you're getting calls left and right on things that are just not true. And it's just, it makes more sense at the present time to just double check. If you receive an email, you'll notice at the header, a lot of times it says, prime example, Scott Felt at the top, but it says some weird Gmail account from something, that doesn't even have his name in it. I mean, that's a pretty good indication that didn't come from Scott, but, a call to the administration office to say, did you mean for me to go ahead with this? I mean, we just basically try to back things up, especially when money's involved.
Right, and not all of these have ended so happily.
Correct. I cite the city of Kewaunee. The new mayor, Jason, apparently had sent out an email, not from his account, to the multiple department heads, one being the library, asking for them to do the exact same thing to help buy these gift cards. I believe the library went ahead and actually bought gift cards, not realizing that it was a scam. They didn't I don't believe they gave the cards to anybody, but they purchased them. I'm not sure where that's being resolved at this point, but Jason called me and said, hey, this doesn't come from me. And I said, well, your account's fine. The other thing is, if you suspect that anything's happening with your current accounts, the easiest way is to change the password right away. Because if they've received your password or got your password somehow, by changing it, that basically cuts them off, at their knees, and they can't move it forward at that point. So.
Right. Yeah, apparently in the lockdown, more people are staying home, got more time
Correct.
on their hands, and so it's even more than usual. One other thing, meetings, board committee meetings, it was requested ideally if they can have them in this room, correct?
If you want them televised on YouTube and be more informed with the public, to be able to have the public watch these meetings and be more informed, my suggestion would be to try to have them in this room. This room is set up at the present time to be able to do that much easier than it's any other location in Kewaunee at the present time. By all means, we're not saying you have to do that. It's really up to the chair of the committee to decide, or the county board chair to basically overrule. But it's we recommend that you come here. It doesn't mean that you have to.
All right. Next meeting would be August 3rd, 6 PM here in this room. Any problems with that? Okay. September, yeah, so you want the September date as well? Sure, we can do that.
7.
Would be the 7th.
Labor Day.
That's Labor Day. I don't think that'll work, huh? 14th. I believe that works, huh?
It's the day before the county board meeting. It's okay.
Should be. Anybody have any problems with that? Okay. So that will be here, Kewaunee. 6 p.m. All right. Motion to adjourn? Oh,
I have
one,
one question
yes,
quick.
sure.
And that would be just a brief from Scott. Has the budget process started?
Budget process will begin at the end of July. So Mr. Kunish sends out information to the department heads, basically gives them the month of August to put together their budget, which is then submitted to finance and the administrator's office. Call the deadline Labor Day, and then that gives us a couple months to nip and tuck for the presentation for the county board meeting in September.
Anything else? Motion to adjourn. Supervisor Wagner, second. Supervisor Augustine. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, we're adjourned.